Good evening, everyone. For those who don't know me, my name is Dean Baxendale. Although when I went through security at the Parliament today, security said to me, "We know who you are. You seem to show up here quite frequently." And so Ottawa has been a place, obviously, to talk about foreign interference by the land state actors. Those include the Prince Alliance, China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea. But primarily our focus for Sam's book has been about the intersection of transnational organized crime, how it's come to shape the landscape here in our political apparatus, and what the ambitions are of the Chinese Communist Party and also malign state actors like Russia and Iran. So it's very important that we live in obviously a different threat environment. We are at war. Let's just call it as it is. The Chinese Communist Party is at war with the West, or at war with democracy. They're using all of their methods, hybrid warfare operations. Maybe that's sponsoring fentanyl precursors to come into Canada, Vancouver, around the globe, Mexico. That money is flowing through illicit means, and that's what Wilful Blindness is about, so Sam will speak to that. So we have some very great speakers here tonight, and I just want to also recognize Blaine Calkins from the PC party. Oh, and Mr. Barrett. Thank you, Michael. And also my good friend, René Villemia from the Bloc. So we have some politicos here, and I know all of you who are here tonight have done a lot of work to bring attention and focus to the issues that Sam has been writing about for a long time. Sam, at great risk, to himself, to bring these stories forward is very, very brave. And as I travel the world now, working with the Uyghurs, with Tibetans, with the Falun Gong, with Hong Kong, dissidents around the world, there's no less than 12 of my authors or contributors that have been directly targeted for operations, everything from assault to online threats to actual threats to their family back home, etc. So Optimum Publishing, unfortunately or fortunately, finds itself at the intersection of what's going on globally, and I travel around the world to let parliaments and other people understand that these threats are here. So tonight we have Charles Burton and Kevin Huang, and of course Michelle Junot-Katsuya, formerly from CSIS, who are all going to speak tonight. And then we're going to have, and then of course the author, Sam, who we'll talk about a little bit more maybe before he gets up to speak. But ultimately this is about an interactive session. It's about a briefing. We're going to talk about the election of interference and obviously the NISCOP report. There are 11 people named in that report. Perhaps some of the names you will find in the last chapter, who may well be under investigation, or we'll just leave it at that. We'll let you have your imagination and go on that way. But this has been a journey with Sam for a long time. We started this about 6 years ago. When I first met Sam, it came through actually Patrick Brown and him being basically targeted as well, the casino money laundering, all of this ties back in. Sam's going to give you that bigger picture tonight. So without further ado, Charles Burton, who's a very good colleague of mine, is actually a mentor for me to understand more about what's going on in China, the deep understanding that Charles has, having been in China, having writes the language, understands the language, lived in China. He's a great expert. And of course we have Kevin, who's an MP, who of course was targeted by the CCP in their own operation. We'll talk a little bit about that tonight. And Michelle Junot-Katsuya, who I've gotten to know over the last few years. And Michelle and I and Gary Clement are working on a journalistic investigation ourselves, kind of looking into Eastern infiltration operations by the Chinese Communist Party, in a book that will come out next April. And again, it's about elite and sub-state capture and all those falling for the money. So without further ado, I would like to welcome Charles to the podium.
Thank you very much, Dean. Back in spring 2021, I wrote the foreword to the first edition of Wilful Blindness, and then in July, Dean asked me to write a new foreword for the third edition of Wilful Blindness that's being launched this evening. The question is, for all of you, what is new in the third edition of Wilful Blindness? I know, I read it, but buy the book and find out. It really is the personal story of Sam as an investigative journalist's evolving quest for the truth about China's malign activities in Canada. And for the past 4 years, since the first edition was written, Sam's investigations have uncovered a lot more reasons for Canadians to be awakened to the threat to Canada's security and sovereignty of China's Communist Party operations in our country. Sam has put in more than 15 years of relentless, painstaking work into examining how the Chinese Communist Party has furtively subordinated any person or group associated with the People's Republic of China to the Chinese Communist Party's regime purposes here in Canada. We find out from his book clearly that any person or group beholden to China, including Chinese organized crime triads, are coerced to fulfill the Chinese Communist Party's strategic agenda, and this is coordinated by China's diplomats here in Canada, China's Ministry of State Security agents here in Canada, and the other agent proxies of the Chinese Communist Party who have been assigned to work here in Canada on behalf of the Chinese Communist Party. China has a lot more people with diplomatic cover here in Canada than any way necessary to fulfill China's legitimate diplomatic functions here. Most of those are involved in espionage and influence operations, and I know that Michelle has talked about this aspect in Parliament. Sam started looking out at the willful blindness of politicians in British Columbia to the operations of Chinese transnational criminal organizations, underground banks, that launder their drug profits through Canadian casinos. Sam was able to reveal how this is connected to the acquisition of Vancouver real estate by corrupt PRC nationals seeking a safe harbor for their ill-gotten gains. Thanks to Sam's meticulous investigations, we now have evidence, clear evidence, that Canada is a paradise for illegal activity by Chinese triad gangs and corrupt figures associated with the Chinese Communist Party. These elements, often under the cover of the United Front Work Department, have found that they can function here without risk of arrest or any kind of accountability for their serious criminal activity. But as Sam's investigations have deepened over the 3 editions of his book, he has uncovered that there is a lot more than simply Canadians in positions of authority turning a blind eye to all of this activity for whatever reason. Since the first edition of Wilful Blindness was released, Sam has become the recipient of more and more classified intelligence assessments. This data has been leaked to him by people who are grievously concerned about the Canadian government's lack of effective response to the concerns raised by CSIS and the Privy Council Office's Intelligence Assessment Secretariat and CSE about the Chinese Communist Party's malign operations here in Canada. Sam concludes in the book that the current state of Canada-China relations is not only informed by comprehensive elite capture, but is also moving incrementally towards full state capture, which threatens the integrity of our democratic institutions and undermines the values of openness and honesty and the freedoms of citizenship that define Canada as a great nation. The United Front Work Department, by running a myriad of influence operations here in Canada, aims no less than to undermine our democratic fundamentals. Canadians need to learn about the United Front Work Department and take this threat from China much more seriously. As relations with China transition from today's hybrid warfare to tomorrow's kinetic military conflict, Canada has apparently made no active preparations for such an outcome. As we need to cease to tolerate the self-interested, willful blindness of our political and economic elite and replace it with renewed Canadian patriotic, willful awareness. Thank you, Sam, for moving the Canadian national debate on China forward in the right direction. I hope you sell many copies of your new book.
I'm very happy to be here, but unfortunately, as a living example of a consequence of what happens when you leave the issue of foreign interference unaddressed. A lot has been discussed about the 11 parliamentarians, and I'll reiterate again that the list of the 11 parliamentarians named in the NSICOP report need to be identified because we cannot go to the polls if Canadians do not know the people that they might be voting for and whether or not they are going to serve the best interests of Canada and their constituents or that of a foreign master. Now, I'll give you 20 and so a lot has been made about the people who have benefited, who have received personal and political gain. But I think there's another aspect that needs to be discussed a little bit more, and unfortunately that's what I'm here to elaborate a little bit on, which is the PRC and other authoritarian regimes also target those who would not be conducive to their agenda. People who would hurt and get in the way of the things that they want to be able to achieve here. So why Kevin? Well, I'm a member of the Chinese diaspora. My parents were refugees who lost their country to communists, who understand the dangers of a radical ideology. Somebody who has been vocal and willing to speak up about the importance of defending democracies, whether they be Taiwan, Hong Kong's democratic institutions, stand up for human rights, and those being grossly violated by the PRC and committing what is a real and actual genocide on Uyghur Muslims. And so, for me, when I was asked to run, I thought I was about to live the Canadian dream. Only then, for a false allegation of the worst thing that you can be accused of in society today, of sexual assault, to magically surface 4 days before the general election. And I think it's important to speak about that and to lead into it, because if we avoid it, as often is the Canadian tendency, right? To be polite, to not talk about uncomfortable things. We played their game, and they win. Earlier this summer, I was at the Interparliamentary Alliance on China. It was hosted this year in Taipei, Taiwan. And it was both reassuring to me, but also in a sad way, to speak with other parliamentarians who had also been falsely accused of sexual assault, who had also been falsely accused of embezzlement and other things. What did we all have in common? We were vocal critics of the PRC and what they were doing in our countries, but also globally. But I think the more we speak about it, the more it helps our respective countries to understand that if this can happen to us, it can happen to anyone. And that's why I'm here today, to add my voice, to let others know that if they can falsely accuse me and drag my name through the mud, they can also do it to you, and they can also do it to other Canadians, and they have, unfortunately. And so, thank you to Dean, to Sam, as well as Michelle and Dr. Burton, for all that you've done to be able to advance the discourse, to get us to a point where Canadians are starting to wake up to the dangers of foreign interference, to the dangers of leaving the PRC to continue to do what they have. Being a doormat cannot be a policy, which unfortunately seems to be what the policy is of the current government. And so I'm grateful to be here, unfortunately as a living example, but also I want to especially thank Sam. I didn't even have to get a quarter way through my story before you're like, oh, honey trap. Same thing with Dean. I don't even have to finish the story. And it's emotionally draining to have to relive probably the most traumatic thing that I have ever had to endure myself. Never mind having to live that at a scale on national television. But I think this truth sets you free, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to be able to speak my truth. Thank you.
My turn. Good evening, everybody. I'm very, very, very pleased and very, very, very honored to be here and participate to the launch of Sam's book. It's third time. Okay, third is a charm, apparently. And it's fun because when Sam arrived a little bit earlier, we kind of talked about when we started to talk to each other and everything. And we go back to almost 15 years when a young journalist called me and was inquisitive about, because he had talked to a friend, Brian McAdam, and he said, you know, I'd like to know more a little bit about what you did with Sidewinder and all that stuff. And that's how it started. I didn't know how long it would last. I found it that he had some big corazon to be capable to do such a thing, because I say, whoa, you don't know what kind of opponent you're going to.
Now I know.
Now you know. But he kept going. He kept going. Kept going. Kept going. You know, in my career, I was fortunate as a counterintelligence officer to work against 3 formidable opponents. When I started my career, and I'm going to date myself here, I started to work on the KGB and the GRU. So I was on the Soviet, and I learned about the Soviet tradecraft. Formidable opponent, very professional, very skilled, very, very different. So, so I worked for 1/3 of my career. Then 2/3 of my career, basically, I worked on the Chinese. Then I thought that I would be prepared, but I wasn't, because the Chinese opponent is totally different, works very, very, very differently. They have time on their side. You know, the Communist Party doesn't have to return to election every 5 years. They don't change policy and orientation every 5 years. No, they go after it, and they're good at it. They're really, really good at it. When we say they wrote the book, read The Art of War. 2,000 years ago, they wrote the book. They know exactly. Now, I told you 3 formidable opponents. My 3rd formidable opponent is the government of Canada. Because the government of Canada, despite the fact that 30 years ago, I was the chief of Asia Pacific and I wrote about the problem that we were facing and everything, every single prime minister, from Mr. Mulroney to Mr. Trudeau today, every single prime minister got compromised. Every single prime minister got informed. Every single prime minister used the information to their strategic advantage, both personal and political. So I'm glad and I'm extremely happy today that we've got somebody like Sam. Hey, we gave the Order of Canada to a singer and a clown. Yeah, you know, because somewhere, somehow, this is the true defense of Canada. We need to sort of expose. It's not because you work in the field of intelligence like I did that you're not accountable for what you do. It's not because you're in politics that you're not accountable for what you do. And what we need to see soon and fast is a non-partisan way to tackle this. And we need people like Sam to reveal to the public what's going on. The courage that others are showing to come forward to explain in a very intelligent way. They're not like that's one thing also that you have in common, the people who've been attacked. They were intelligent in their discourse. They were very brilliant in presenting the problem. But because they were so intelligent, they were a greater threat, and therefore they were targeted because of that. And that's the challenge. You know, there's over 300 people in the spring that went in front of 4 different parliamentary committees. And still we needed a public inquiry. You know, it's just like no expert told you exactly what's going on. 350 people sing the same song from the same sheet, and that's not enough. And still to this day, we need to sort of tackle the issue from a legal point of view so that we can give the weapons or the tools for the law enforcement to be capable to prosecute. And we need the awareness. Awareness is the only defense. And the awareness is the light that we shed on the dark element of our society that are operating in the dark and successful because we let them operate in the dark. And Sam, the flashlight, is this everybody, guys, that doesn't stop. And I love it. And I love it. So I strongly encourage you to continue supporting his work. Follow his work also on the Bureau. because it keeps us informed very, very well of what's going on also in the whole commission, which is most of the time only the tip of the iceberg. But at least it helps us to understand how things are going and why they are happening the way they are happening. And I thank also, by the same token, the parliamentary people that are working hard. And I know, again today I was testifying in front of one of the committee, I know sometimes it feels like you're butting your head against the wall. It's really, really, really difficult, partly when there is institutional manipulation and stubbornness not to do the right thing. But please continue. Please continue. We need your work. We need your help. That's with this guy, our last line of defense.
So, kind of to set up Sam's discussion, earlier on this week, on Monday or Tuesday, there was a letter delivered from the Congressional Executive Committee on China, a committee that I'm very familiar with and I work with in Washington directly. As I've mentioned, I work specifically with the World Uyghur Congress and others within the Uyghur community. That came through my work with Ben Rogers on the China Nexus and trying to bring a united front for freedom and democracy together. And I've done launches in Washington with the NED, et cetera. They sent a letter to Trade Minister Mary Ng. And the gist of that letter is, and there was coverage in the National Post, Sam's bureau, he did a great job identifying this issue. And that is this, that there is a provision within the USMCA that requires Canada to stop forced labor from entering this country. And if we are not working together, Mexico, Canada, and the United States, to stop forced labor or child labor products from entering our supply chain, we're only jeopardizing our own national security. And by the way, in talking quietly amongst Congress people that I speak with in Washington and people on the committees, they're very aware of Canada. They're very aware of the issues with respect to us not doing the things that all these gentlemen have talked about here tonight, and Sam will get into a little bit more. But we're talking about state capture. We're talking about elite capture at a high level. And I've watched this play out throughout the world. Sam has been reporting on it for a long time. He's going to speak to that issue tonight and understanding it a little bit better. But you know, I want to say thank you to everybody who's here tonight, because you want to be here to defend democracy, to defend our great country, defend its people, defend the diaspora communities in this country. It's been a long time. The police have done nothing. The stories that I've heard are horrific. So again, this is about the United Front. Sam is a phenomenal writer. I'd be glad to support him as a publisher and bring his stories forward. And as he brings more stories and more books, I'm doing a book with Charles, actually two, that will come out. One will come out next year as well. And my goal as a publisher is to focus more and more energy on this so we get it right. We get our country back, we take it away from foreign actors, and we make it safe again for us all to be here. Sam Cooper, without any further ado, my friend.
Thanks everyone for being here. I just first say I have a very warm heart, a feeling that we have a great crowd here, and Dean, thank you for putting out a nice spread. Everyone's enjoying themselves, and I just thank you all so much from all avenues of life here. It feels like some traction is being gained, and I've written a lot of words already today. I've spoken a lot of words into cameras already today, so I'll be very brief, but maybe some juicy factoids will come out in our discussion. I won't stand up and try to tell you what's in the chapter right here today, because you need to read it, and I think it'll explain that I have a little something prepared, and it just feels so appropriate, because what I heard from everyone that I was talking to personally, what I heard from all of our great experts and our publisher is that adversaries are winning in our countries by buying, bribing, coercing, threatening us into silence. I think you said being a doormat is not a policy. But it is not. This is how we are being defeated. The chapter is about how elites silently, subtly, are leveraged by the adversaries in our country. The means are corruption, but it's also fear. It's almost like a cartel tactic. Do you want the gold or the lead or the silver? The silver being the bullet. You know, this is happening. And you know, just to set up the chapter, it was important for me to understand that this is happening, of course, as we know, in other countries. And a great documentary came out in New Zealand very recently from Stuff. They quoted an MP, a former MP, a rising star, Jamie Lee Ross. He shot himself in the foot. Apparently he was upset at not getting a promotion. He got mad at his party leaders back in 2018, and he went to the press. Essentially, he became a sort of whistleblower. He took down his party. A criminal case against United Front leaders resulted. We can't say that charges actually stuck, but the point of the story is this. He said in this documentary with Stuff Circuit New Zealand, remember again what Mr. Vaughan said, MP Vaughan said. Jamie Lee Ross told the interviewers, if something's happening in the South Pacific regarding China, do we overtly speak out in the same way that our allies, like the US and the UK and Australia do? He didn't say Canada. I'm not sure why he didn't say it in that quote, but onward. No, we end up shutting our mouth. We as a country have a political system that has foreign interference from a non-friendly country directly into the heart of the political system through the members of parliament, through the money that flows into our political system. Even if you can't pinpoint some direct link, some direct outcome, the whole system over years gets eroded. And I thought, how appropriate. That's the NSA COP 2024 report right there, without the names. So I'll sit down and maybe we'll say a few juicy things. But again, my heart is warm. Thank you for being here tonight.
This is really an interactive event. This is about you asking questions. But I'm going to start off first question for Sam, and then we're going to open it up to the floor, because I think it's important. People want to have a better understanding. So as I mentioned, they're kind of setting this up with respect to the CECC. They sent a letter to Mary Ng, as well as the trade minister in Mexico, asking for cooperation. If you don't, we may leverage that against Canada in the 2026 trade negotiations on the USMCA. So Mary Ng, she's been in the center and focused in an area of writing where we know triads and transnational organized crime are set up. 3 of the largest in the world have their headquarters there. So, and that's been an activity hotbed for many, many years in Don Valley North, et cetera. So the Americans were wondering why we were not enforcing, not stopping any shipments. Could it be possible that maybe Mary Ng, in her capacity and perhaps being, somewhat favorable to Beijing, may have not stepped up and said we need to enforce? So we'll kind of start that with the question, because we know Mary Ng's in the chapter. So I'll open that up to Sam, and we'll go from there.
You're kind of handing me a little bit of a bombshell there. I think what you're asking is she one of the 11? So let's not just, we might as well come out and say people that read Wilful Blindness understood that they came to me first as a reporter in Canada that had understood the United Front, and in the previous edition predicted the election interference story essentially. And so I can say today that Minister Ng hasn't responded to any of my questions for the Bureau. She did not respond to, my reaching out to her numerous times. But Minister Ng was a very top-level concern of the sources that came to me, allowing me to break the story of Chinese election interference. I write in the chapter, in carefully legally vetted language, that Minister Ng is classified as one of the 11 MPs implicated in the Chinese interference allegations in 2019. If that's news, I've already written it in the Bureau and haven't heard too much feedback yet, but look, you're hearing it from me tonight. I welcome Minister Ng's response, but her path from the Prime Minister's office, her, if you want to call it luck or placement, replacing the former ambassador, or the to-be ambassador, Mr. McCallum, this was of great interest to the people that came to me with the concern that Canada is no longer really a member of the Five Eyes, as they told me, as I explained in interviews before our event tonight. Our allies do not see Canada as a top-level member of the Five Eyes, and the concerns are natural. If you've got a minister in charge of trade who could be voting or not voting on Uyghur genocide issues, that speaks for itself, doesn't it?
It certainly does, and of course, John McCallum, who we highlighted in Hidden Handle, we published that in 2020 about his adjacency to Beijing and his reaction, obviously, on the two Michaels, highlighted. That was the first book that I experienced direct lawfare, potentially from the Chinese Communist Party, as we exposed the elites here in Canada, as well as the UK, and the 48 Group Club, which is formerly came out of the the British Communist Party, 5 ambassadors to China, David Cameron, all with a path to the money coming from Beijing and elite capture. So we're seeing this kind of play out. And by the way, I spend more money on legals to publish Sam than it gets paid in royalties, I think. But that's the risk that one has to take to bring this material forward and make sure it's legally vetted properly and effectively. And again, as I said, all of our authors are targeted. These are brave people. And anyway, let's open it up to the floor. Let's have some questions from the audience. And MP, would you like to give you an opportunity?
Yeah, thanks, Stephen. That's fantastic.
Yeah.
So actually, there was a comment, Sam. I wanted to say thank you. I've been a member of the Procedure House Affairs Committee, looking into this for quite some time. It's something that I never thought that I would be working on. I'm more of a outdoorsy hunter, angler, conservation officer kind of guy. But one of the things that like I'm a patriot at heart. I have generations of my family lay in war cemeteries around the world, and I believe in my country. I still believe in my country, and I believe that we're heading down a dangerous path. The International Coalition Against Illicit Economies published a paper here a little while ago that actually terrifies me. I've got grave concerns about illicit economies and how money is flowing to and from and through Canada, drugs, all kinds of things, and our reputation is being tarnished, and somebody somewhere ought to be doing something different. But one of the things actually is a statement that you made, I think, Mr. Burton, as you've been before the committee before as well. You said a statement that the unpreparedness of Canada right now in foreign affairs, and so how I interpreted it was our unpreparedness right now to do anything on the international stage from a foreign policy and military and so on perspective is not an accident, and that's how I interpreted your sentence. And I'm wondering if you have any more that you can elaborate on, because this is about as serious as it gets.
Well, I mean, I think certainly, there are vested interests in Canada who don't want to stick their necks out and offend the Chinese regime because maybe after they lose in the next election, they're hoping to get some kind of law firm or board work that would sustain them through their 50s and 60s, for which they would be toxic if the Chinese embassy had them on a list as unfriendly to China. So I think from that point of view, a lot of people receive information, evidently, as Sam says, and they put it in the back of a drawer and hope someone else will act on it. And that seems to explain a lot of what's going on with the Foreign Influence Commission, that people just feel, I don't want to be the one that alerts the Canadian people to what's going on and demands that Canada take action to effectively do something about it. I mean, I think the first thing we should be doing is implementing the Vienna Convention and removing any diplomats in Canada who are engaged in activities which are not consistent with their diplomatic function. And I think it's Michelle who suggested that that would be about 70% of the Chinese embassy, because they do have an enormous diplomatic cohort compared to other countries. So,
Twice the size of the American, and the American is 80% of our economy.
so you know, I do think that we do have this problem, and the problem, it's like Pogo said, I've seen the enemy and he's us. You know, it's our own people with their naivety and greed and willingness to allow themselves to be seduced by China's very sophisticated, very well-funded United Front operation and Ministry of State Security. They put enormous resources into that work here in Canada. We're not putting comparable resources into countering it through reorganizing CSIS, the RCMP, and CSE to be able to better be on top of it. And when we get information that there's an MSS agent operating in Canada, instead of worrying about how sad it is that the Canadian diplomat who was expelled from Shanghai has to take her children out of school, we ought to be suffering the consequences of doing the right thing.
I would add that, I mean, again, this is one of these statements where you say, we're failing on an international stage, and it may be by design. It's just hard to confront that for the average Canadian and believe there could be any basis to it. So one tends to, if you're writing these things, maybe you start to be, oh, they're a little bit out there. But look, I write in the book about the Cameron Ortis case. The MP talks about illicit economies. And what I was hearing, again, from, let's just say, governmental sources, was the case of Ortis, in charge of intelligence for the RCMP, with direct access to NSA, CIA, secrets, etc. The belief came to be within the RCMP that it wasn't just a crime of corruption, it was a crime of misdirecting Canada's enforcement lens. So if you have a friend that's involved in what a friend would call a forward operational hub of Chinese and Iranian organized crime encryption technology in Richmond, could you direct the RCMP eyes elsewhere? And if one does that, it leads to failing on an international stage so that your economy is being used by foreign intelligence and organized crime. So just to give everyone a little concrete example that this isn't just theory or academic, and you're a great academic, but there are people with boots on the ground saying it's happening.
And the Americans are very aware of it. And of course, I think we're going to, they're running operations inside Canada, have been forever, because we're not doing our job. And at the end of the day, I have to say this, as a patriotic Canadian, we need to get politicians, we need to get our enforcement people working closer together, bringing that intelligence out of the U.S. and Five Eyes into Canada to combat this, because we're not going to do it on our own. I was at an event with the president of the NEB. He said, "Oh, you guys will figure it all out yourself." And I looked at my colleague who I was with, and he looks at me and he says, "I don't think we're going to get there on our own." But it's going to take the collective effort of everybody in this room to believe in the democracy, start to work with law enforcement and giving them the tools to combat what's going on. Right now, they do not have the tools. We know that. C-70 is coming through. Anyway, next question. Pamela from Whistleblowing Canada.
Whistleblowing Canada Research Society. Yes, I'm interested in the fact that there are a number of people in this room who were here 30 years ago when all of this stuff started happening. And one of them is Michelle from CSIS. The other is Sandy Boucher, who was with the Hong Kong police.
Yep.
I don't know if he's paying attention here. In Hong Kong. And there are some people that I think should be mentioned who aren't here. And one of them is Brian McAdam, and the other one from the RCMP, because you mentioned the RCMP, is Robert Reed, who had the guts to go public about the fact that the RCMP were not doing anything about his reports. And he suffered greatly. He went through the courts. He even won, a tribunal who said that they should take him back. He did nothing wrong. It didn't happen. So what is it? Two questions, I guess. Why is the Election Interference Committee not investigating back to the mid-90s when all this stuff started? Number one, and when all of the people who started exposing the fact that there was a corrupt Canadian High Commission in Hong Kong who was facilitating all of this, they were infiltrated, they were being bribed by the triads, and when Brian McAdam told his boss, and when all of you told everybody in our governmental apparatus of what was really going on, you were all suppressed and punished. So don't you think there would be some value in going back and looking at where suppressing and punishing whistleblowers has gotten, and back in 1990, starting in 93, 96 or so, it started, becoming more public. And I have a page on our website that traces the whole thing, leading us to election interference today. Why is this commission not investigating all of this, and why are we still suppressing truth tellers, honest employees, honest public servants doing their jobs, and the people who suppress them have gotten promotions?
Right. So I'm gonna ask Michelle to take that question in a second. And by the way, one of those people that was there in Hong Kong, Gary Clement, author of Undercover.
Oh, yes, he's the other
who's a
one.
great
I
friend.
forgot
Unfortunately, he
Gary.
has COVID, and so could not come tonight. But I think Michelle can kind of tackle this question really well.
And to go a little bit further to appall's people, I'll tell the story about Robert, because Robert and I were working on a mixed task force at that period of time with Brian McAdam, with Sandy. And Robert found a foreign officer from DFA at that time, Canadian, who gave a written sworn statement saying that every month he has the chance to go to Hong Kong and to collect a suitcase full of cash that it would bring back to Canada. And because he's got diplomatic immunity, he would go through the custom, and he would give that suitcase to either Mr. Van Rolling or the treasurer of the Conservative Party at that time. Now, for that, he went to the public because he went through this entire chain of command to try to get them to do the right thing, but it was too big. Just like when Brian tried to sort of reveal what was going on in Hong Kong, it was too big. So Gary Clement was sent away. Brian was called back in Canada, and a very, very, very strong repression from his own people in immigration started. So that's why I was talking about, I fought three formidable opponents: the Russians, KGB, the Soviet, if you prefer, the Chinese, and the Canadian government. Canadian government at the end of the day. But it's individual within the system that are playing the game. Mr. Chrétien, Power Corporation, should I say more? 5 cabinet members after Mr. Harper went directly to work with Chinese companies like Mr. Stark-Welday or Mr. Bear, thank you, or Mr. Jason Kenney, And I can talk also about mayors in major cities in Canada who are currently on the payroll of the Chinese. It's formidable. It's been frustrating, extremely frustrating. I can only now, since I have a moment, thank also Sandy and you working on whistleblower issues, because we don't have a whistleblower protection or law or anything like this that is decent in this country. Not at all, not at all. But we need this. If in the fall of 2022, whistleblower didn't go to Sam in the media and reveal what they knew about foreign interference, we would not be talking about it today. We would not have the inquiry that we currently have, and you would not have, as parliamentarian, the challenge that you've been facing. So, did the guy broke the law? Maybe. Ethically, maybe, but not morally, because this person morally went further and helped us in trying to understand. And we might have, just like Leonard Cohen is saying, there's a little crack and a little bit of light is going through, and maybe we have a chance now to maybe do something about it. But as we were saying just a moment ago, it needs everybody's help to push and put their shoulders to the wheel, because we need a lot of help here. And we need to force also, because we're going to be going to election in the near future, not that far. Not really sure when. Maybe those guys can help, right? But we need to ask those questions. We need to ask our MPs not to be victims like good Canadians have been victimized. And we need to stop that right away. Yeah, it will be difficult questions. Do we have a worse government today than we had before? No. But they're all part of the problem. They're not part of the solutions. And we need to fix that.